What about attractive women? Are they the ones that are having a lot of sex, or attractive women extra promiscuous with this dearth of globalized sexual marketplace and sheikhs on Instagram being able to message them to come out to Dubai?
Well, certainly the research seems to indicate the opposite, with the most attractive women actually indicating fewer partners, and women who are neither the least attractive nor the most attractive reporting more sexual partners. And that's something that is kind of in line with evolutionary theories for why that might be, right? Because if you're a very, very attractive woman, first, I guess some background here would be that women, there's a huge difference. One of the most well replicated differences between men and women, given from evolutionary psychology, as far as replication crisis in psychology, something that's very, very well replicated is very large differences in sociosexuality between men and women. Men are very, very open to having a lot of sex, many partners, being promiscuous. Women, much, much, much less so. So given that basis, a very attractive woman physically has many, many more options. She can be more selective. A woman who is slightly less attractive, say medium attractiveness or something, she may actually need to use sex more to secure mates, to secure a partner or something like that. And in that sense, sex serves as sort of a function to secure a mate in that sense. And then people who are very, very low at the end of attractiveness, they may have difficulty finding a mate at all in that case. So that's probably how you get that middle range of female attractiveness that's associated with more sexual partners. Men, on the other hand, the most attractive men, attractiveness is linear as far as predicting sexual partners for men, but it's also not a very, very strong correlation either.
What does incentivize female short-term mating then?
So certainly the paradigm for short-term mating would be the dual mate hypothesis in evolutionary psychology for a long time. This is what it has been until relatively recently, right? And the idea here was that men and women, but we'll talk about women specifically in this case, have a dual strategy for selecting a mate. One strategy is looking for a long-term mate who can provide resources, form a pair bond, and raise a child, basically. And the other is a short-term strategy. And that short-term strategy was very closely related to the ovulatory shift hypothesis, right? Because the idea is that when a woman is fertile, she looks for a man with good genes, and gets pregnant by this man so that she can have the good genes and then at the same time have this long-term mate at the same time. So this was an idea that persisted for maybe a decade and a half in evolutionary psychology. And at this point now, evolutionary psychology has shifted very, very much away from that. They've said, there actually isn't that much evidence for this dual mate hypothesis. Something David Buss and Schmidt recently wrote in an article on sexual strategies theory, which is what I've just described. It's called sexual strategies theory. Was that really this short-term mating strategy probably only applies to a very, very select few women. And those are going to be women who score very, very high in sociosexuality. If you look at, as I mentioned, sociosexuality, big sex differences. If you were to look at the two distributions, they're about 1.5 standard deviations away from one another, if I remember correctly. So a lot of men and women don't even overlap at all as far as these sociosexuality scores. So what would drive short-term mating in that case? Well, one of the big motives mentioned in the recent article by Buss and Schmidt would be money. And certainly that's not what a lot of people, I think about when they have this short-term mating discourse. They think, oh, they want a Chad who's hot and everything and all of that. But if money is a big one, and you can see this in things like sex work, you can see this in things like the kind of, who is this recently? Leonardo DiCaprio. He finds very, very young women. Now, he was an attractive man before, but he's getting very, very old. Do we believe that these women are interested in Leonardo DiCaprio because he is an attractive man or because he has many, many resources? So these are things that would incentivize short-term mate strategies. But more interesting than that, perhaps, is that the shift has gone from saying, people have this, all women have this dualistic mating strategy, short-term and long-term, to saying, okay, there's actually a lot of overlap between short and long-term mate strategies. That short-term strategies may actually be kind of a springboard or a doorway into long-term mate strategies. A good example of this, reported by David Buss in his research, was that about 70-something% of women who have affairs, they report, for example, being in love with their affair partner. And this has led to kind of this new paradigm in evolutionary psychology that's called the mate switching hypothesis, which is that short-term mating is not something apart from long-term mating. It's not going out there to secure the good genes. It's looking for a new long-term mate. So this short-term mate, this playing the field outside might be like, okay, maybe my satisfaction with this mate has decreased, but I don't want to break up yet. I need some kind of security going into a new relationship. So I'm kind of exploring these short-term things to see if they become something larger or something longer in that sense.
Yeah, women monkey branching from one relationship to another. I found it so interesting, because the dual mating hypothesis was founded by Buss as well, right? Yeah, so David Buss comes up with this theory, then he kind of reassesses the data, recants his original theory. And the problem is, it's kind of like the same thing when you have a newspaper article that accuses someone of something and then publishes a retraction a little bit further down the line. The issue that you've got is the retraction never gets as much exposure as the original accusation does. And now we are stuck in this sort of liminal space where the guys that did the study say that the study no longer holds water, and this original theory is still continuing to kind of plow ahead. I don't know. I can't really work out why it's the case that the dual mating hypothesis seems to keep moving when the guys that say, 'cause it hasn't replicated either, right? When they tried to do this again.
Certainly. So something, that David Buss said in this recent paper, it's titled Sexual Strategies Theory, 2021. It might be a book chapter in the new Oxford Handbook of Evolutionary Psychology, or it might just be a review. But, he says, okay, so these aren't entirely contradictory. You can have short and long-term strategies, but this mate switching seems to be much more common, and this, actual women pursuing short-term strategies pretty rare. So that's something to consider. What hasn't replicated well, so one of the things that this was very, very heavily based on initially was, it was called, the dual mate hypothesis, but a longer title for this, or a version of this, would be the dual mate hypothesis of ovulatory shifts. And the idea is that when women ovulate, when women are fertile, that's when they're especially attracted to men with good genes, right? And that's when they're more likely to cheat and all of that. So that's what specifically hasn't replicated very well. What we see instead is actually that women are pretty much attracted to the exact same type of men for long-term and for short-term relationships. The reassessment that Buss and Schmidt kind of made in this paper was like, okay, so good genes are not just physical either. Good genes include things like intelligence. They include things like prosocial behavior. They include the behaviors that would make someone stay with a partner and raise a child and provide resources and all of that. So why would none of those things be selected for in a short-term mate? Why would it just be physical? That's one issue with that. We don't see the shift in actual preferences. That's the big thing that has not replicated, that I think undermined this a lot and kind of caused that shift away from it, was we don't see that women seek men who are more physically attractive when they're ovulating. They want physically attractive men all the time. And so that's something, if you talk about the black pill, they're not wrong about that. People like physically attractive people. They like facially attractive people, muscular men, and that sort of thing. That's a real thing. So, and that's something that persists for both long-term and short-term. So we don't see that there. Another one that kind of hasn't replicated well, that would have lended support to that as well, was the good genes, immunocompetence, testosterone hypothesis. And the idea is, okay, so when women are ovulating, they're attracted to men who have very, very high testosterone. High testosterone signals good genes. Why is that? Because high testosterone causes a handicap in immunocompetence. To have high testosterone, you're actually lowering your immune system a little bit. And that means that you have to be especially fit to have high testosterone. So none of that has really replicated very well. So many of these things that we think of as signaling good genes from an evolutionary standpoint, perhaps they don't. We don't see the switch in mate preferences for short-term and long-term as previously believed. And we see in actual behavior, as well as reports, that a lot of these short-term relationships are kind of, as you said, they look more like monkey branching than they do a different strategy. They look like someone that wants to leave a particular, a woman that wants to leave a relationship and enter a new long-term relationship. There's huge differences in sociosexuality, huge sex differences in preferences for monogamous relationships as well. All of that kind of leads toward, okay, women probably are not engaging in a lot of short-term mating. And in a way, it's almost like when people talk about women that way, it's almost like ascribe more male personality characteristics to women. It's almost like if I were a woman, that's what I would do. But that's,
Yes.
women are very different in a lot of these ways.
What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full, unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.